China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitola Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
好，同学们，我们在荒荒烈烈的站起来，站起来。Ladies and gentlemen, back in 1942, Mao Zedong kicked off his Yan'an Chengfeng, or rectification movement. His objective was to purify the thinking of the Chinese communists and get everybody to think correctly, like him. In the next 3 years, Mao and his gang killed an estimated 10,000 people, getting them to think correctly. In 2022, Xi Jinping kicked off his rectification movement at the CCP's 20th Congress by purging those who were not thinking correctly, namely Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao and their gangs. Xi followed up his congressional call with a trip to Yan'an, where he visited the museum holding the mementos of Mao's great rectification call. Given Xi Jinping's dedication to Mao's thinking, it seems obvious that the whole bunch of rectifying is in store for the folks in the Middle Kingdom. Also in 2022, citizens of the United States held their biannual rectification movement, which is called an election. It is difficult... Well,
I'm sorry. I tried to stifle that one, but I just couldn't.
Yeah.
It is difficult to see that much of any purging was done in this election, and so we can safely assume that the U.S. will continue in the same direction it has been going for the past 2 years. And so today we ask, has the CCP's rectification and the U.S. election changed the relationship of our two countries? Welcome to the Rectification Election edition of the China Watch Radio Show.
You said that very well without making a mistake.
I'm impressed.
We're starting
tongue tire.
Tongue tire. So here we are. We've got a great show today. We're going to talk about the relationship of China and the United States in relation to that elections and the rectification that we both had. And see what we think. What do you think the future is going to hold for us? Will we go to war? Will we practice some peace? What do you think? The second hour is all about that, and it's all for you. So be ready with your phone calls and join us when you can. With us today, we have on the boards. Is Susan in there?
She is. She's running the board.
Susan Simon's running the boards. Bill Graff is here in the talk studio at the controls.
That's me.
That's you. David Welsh is here. Welcome.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Boy, David popped in at 1/32 of a second.
Just in time.
But he's here.
Welcome to 41st Avenue.
There you go. And then John T. Collier is up in the trees as per usual. John T., is it beautiful up there in the mountains today?
It's beautiful. I'm here, and I'm ready to purify some thinking.
Purify some thinking. That's what we're going to be doing today. Good. Well, we're going to start off with David Welch, who's going to tell us about Space Pearl Harbor.
Well, gentlemen, this is really interesting. As you know, we're engaging, some would say, maybe a space race, at least a heavy competition.
Well, we now have the Space Force.
We have the Space Force. You know, it's interesting, as the competition has heated up over the last several years, people made fun of the Trump administration for coming up with the Space Force. But I think now, as things become exposed that were once classified, as we start to witness this unfolding, we realize that there's actually a fairly significant competition for space in a variety of dimensions. Not only the governments are competing for the ability to access of materials on the moon, preparing for exploration of other planets, but the really development of science, the things that you can do in zero gravity and orbit, becomes really critical. You can actually grow enormous crystalline structures that are one solid crystal, as opposed to many crystals,
Wow.
which could be fractured. So there's a number of really interesting, really kind of bleeding edge, science that's going on, and prototypes of manufacturing of new processes. But also at the this economic level, right? At a commerce level, right? There's more domestication of space technology. We're seeing more and more. I think what Trump used to call the billionaires who want to fly to space. Make investments in a civilian space program. So we've got the government, United States government, obviously heavily involved in the military as well, involved in space. We have wealthy individuals who've spun up companies who are doing, domestic civilian space efforts. Some of those get linked together.
Musk.
Well, like Elon Musk. You got Blue Origin from, Amazon, Bezos, and some others. You've got the billionaire as well from England, right? Who's with the Virgin Atlantic. So, there are a lot of efforts, and there's a lot of other efforts, more than that's going on as well. That's our country. As we start to look over now to China, we see the Chinese are aggressively have indicated that they want to get to the moon. They want to, be able to have a large footprint in space.
Their own space station quietly built.
They do. And one of the things that they have built now is a space plane, kind of like our shuttle, except it's smaller. And it was recently detected flying 90 days around our planet. And in flying in formation with it was a small object. And people are trying to figure out what this small object actually is and what it does. Well, we don't know exactly. There have been offensive capabilities developed in space for espionage. So, for example, we've caught the Russians on a couple of occasions who've launched a small device that actually sat in proximity of our spy satellites. And they had probably, through espionage, I'm speculating, had picked up some vulnerability. They obviously can't tap the telemetry coming from, that satellite that's all encrypted and protected. But there's probably some vulnerability. We probably didn't build in protections for somebody eavesdropping 3 feet away from it out at 22,000 miles in a geosynchronous orbit.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
So they think that this Chinese device might be some type of an intelligence gathering device, possibly. In fact, some of our newest satellites actually have a defensive measures built into them to push, these adversaries away if we can detect them. So people are speculating about this, particular mission that China has in orbit, and coincidentally, it aligns with our own Artemis 1 rocket that's launching next week. And so, as many people are aware, Artemis is the NASA re-engagement to landing on the moon. So this is a robotic flight. It's going to carry a lot of instrumentation with it. It's the precursor to actually a manned flight for us back to the moon. So we're in heavy competition in space at a variety of levels.
Now, I understand this Artemis flight is going longitudinal.
Yes.
And the reason it's going longitudinal is that it's particularly interested in scanning the south pole of the moon, because that is believed where the water is.
They believe that there's ice crystals underneath the surface.
And so I understand that both the United States and China will be building bases on the southern part of the moon.
So there's a race for early access, because just for the audience's benefit, if you can find water, you can cleave off the hydrogen and oxygen, because it's an H2O molecule, and you can actually make rocket fuel on the moon instead of carrying it. Yeah.
It occurs,
and oxygen, so you have
It occurs to me, though, that where the frozen water might be is on the dark side of the moon that never sees the sun.
I think that's been well explored, but it's a good point, Billy. I think they figured out that the moon at one time had
water,
had polar caps like it did here on Earth, and so they're thinking that those ice might be subterranean, so it'd be protected by the soil. It'd have to be mined out.
Oh,
is the speculation.
So we have a space
what a story!
race.
This is a scary story for me, because I sort of put out of my mind that we would have space espionage, next, parked next to our satellites. That's kind of scary.
Well, there's a lot of stuff flying around up there. If you look at Musk's low Earth orbit, the Europeans have a lot of low Earth orbit.
Well, look, if I win the
satellites.
lottery, my job, my new company. No, seriously, if I won the $1 billion lottery, my new company I would start would be the one that would be the space garbage guy. That's what I want to clean up all the junk.
Yeah.
Well, who's going to pay you to do that?
The United States government.
There you go.
Which leads us to our next story, oddly enough, because it's not happening in space, it's happening here on Earth. This story from Daily Caller News Foundation by Jack McElvoy, who says that Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will not be attending COP27, United Nations Climate Conference in Egypt. Two of the world's giant polluters are not going to show up. Now, both of them put together do over a third of the total global pollution. Just two countries make a third of the global pollution.
Wow.
And so what China did is that they sent their their climate czar, his name is Xi Jinping, Jinhao, and who suggests that the wealthier nations give money to the poorer nations to help them recover from loss and damage caused by climate change. Now, this loss and damage is turning out to be a very, very big thing. I was asking Billy who the heck's going to pay him and his company for cleaning up all the space junk. Well, this is kind of similar because back in 1991, Vanuatu went to the United Nations and said, look, we're suffering because you guys are polluting the earth with carbon gases and stuff. So you should pay us, give us money. And which is, pretty smart of those Nivans. But this whole idea was put down. But by 2007, COP formally recognized the need for a means to address loss and damage associated with the climate change. Now, this loss and damage payments have come to be known as climate reparations, right? So, and then they have become the third pillar of the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2016. So you can see as we go through time, more and more and more credibility is given to this notion that the rich folks pay the poor folks for being rich.
Or rich
and
people who
making a
pretend to be
mess.
poor, like China.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really about money more than the pollution.
Yeah.
Because the big polluters are not the ones that are going to have to pay the money. Now, it wasn't
Climate credits.
Climate credits.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too long ago that Xi Jinping went to Germany and addressed the German people who were in the process of firing up their coal-burning energy because Russia shut off the supply of
Got to keep the lights
Natural
on.
gas, yeah.
right? And the Chinese guy says, look, you guys have to stop cutting back on your promises because you promised to quit, doing this. And we've been holding the line, but actually they're not holding the line at all, right? So he says, if you be sure when you go to the COP27 in Egypt that you pay your fair share. We need the money. And this is the Chinese guy who's making all of the... and incidentally, the Chinese government stopped all reduction of carbon emissions for the concept of energy security. So they're still building coal-burning power plants,
No
one after
kidding.
the other, and one after the other, one after the
And
other.
they're buying coal from anybody that'll sell it.
They're buying coal.
Thank you,
from-
BlackRock.
Yes,
Yeah.
there you go. Thank you, BlackRock.
Yeah.
And so now, how do we, as a country, come to grips with that? Well, if you listen to our climate czar, who is none other than, what's his name?
It's good to forget.
Kerry.
Yeah,
John Kerry.
yeah.
Yeah, the guy with a real suave haircut.
The 5 mansions
Yeah,
and the jets. Yeah.
The guy who married conservative Republican Senator John Warner, I think it was, from Virginia. He passed away. John Kerry swooped in, carried away his rich wife, and now is one very rich man.
Yep.
That is. And so he...
I thought he got rich on climate credits.
Well, it could be. He's going to be spending a lot. But he estimates, this is what John Kerry said in response to a question about whether the U.S. plans to direct funding to pay for loss and damage reparations to poor countries. He says, the most important thing that we can do is to prevent loss and damage. So think about that. How are we going to prevent loss and damage in throughout the world? Okay. The next important thing that we can do is to help people adapt to the damage that's already there. And when asked about the cost, Kerry said estimates put the price tag on loss and damage anywhere between $290 and $580 billion per year by 2030.
So let me ask you, if you pay that money in loss and damages to China, Michael, would it go into them offsetting carbon, or would it go back to the space program?
Oh, sure. Well, we know it's going to go. It's going to go to Wuhan. We're going to make more bugs. But if the United States accepts this concept of paying loss and damage reparations, where does the liability end? Where would it ever end?
Yeah. Was a precedent set where somebody could actually make a tort suit in the United States?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once we say, okay, China, we'll pay you $1 billion for some, why would we pay China? Vanuatu.
Yeah.
Okay, Vanuatu, we'll pay you $1 billion because the seas are rising, and we accept responsibility for that. Where does that lead us?
Well, it leads us to a really unhappy conversation.
Yeah.
To say the very least, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Like the road to perdition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
no good outcome to the conversation.
Yeah.
John
I
T.
personally have suffered from various emotional stress and strain as a result of the climate crisis. So, and I've got a good lawyer. I do want to mention there was an article that I wanted to post on our website, but it was behind a firewall, so you screw those guys. But the headline of the article was that China in the last 8 years has produced as much CO2 as the United Kingdom since the Industrial Revolution.
Wow. That's a startling stat. Where'd you come up with that one?
I can't remember now. It's behind a paywall, so I'm really happy. But that would sort of beg the question: if any countries are going to be paying reparations, shouldn't it be the ones that are producing the majority of the CO2?
I would just remind people that 30 years ago, most of China was riding around on bicycles.
That's right.
And now you've got over 1 billion people in automobiles.
Something Jonty just mentioned strikes me. Should not the countries that are preventing ecological fixing of the problem of CO2.
Since we're doing the good job, shouldn't we get paid?
Well, not only that, look at Brazil. It's cutting down part of the rainforest. I think in the last program we figured out it was like 15% of the rainforest is in trouble. Mm-hmm. But that translates to a lot of climate problems.
Oxygen,
lack of oxygen.
Yeah, you're not making it. Well, also in places like...
Should they not pay?
I would think it'd be flipped the other way around. You're right. I think the offenders ought to pay, into a pool. What's interesting, too, about India is that they actually cook a lot of food with coal. So you have a lot of individual households and people who are poor, even living outdoors as homeless.
Cooking on wood fires.
They got a chunk of coal.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or they burn wood.
Yeah.
Inefficiently.
They pollute a lot.
They pollute a lot, yeah.
So that's really an excellent question. Shouldn't the people who are making the mess pay the reparations? Now, only politics could flip that question on its head.
Yeah.
Only John Kerry.
The hypocrite.
Who's the little gal? Greta Thunberg?
Oh, yeah, the petulant child.
The petulant child, yeah. But, so the question is, ladies and gentlemen, should the United States pay reparations to the poor countries in the world for loss and damage due to climate change.
Okay, can we ask another question while we're asking questions like this? If the United States is buying all of these goods that are made in pollution zones, should we not pay when we buy the stuff?
Hey, there you go. Shouldn't there be a climate a change tax on everything that comes from China?
I know, guys. I have the solution. Yeah. If we had a digital currency, we could program it so that you would only get a certain amount of carbon credits, and when you ran out, well, you couldn't buy anything else. Of course, you get to sell those carbon credits to Klaus Schwab if you like.
No, but seriously, though, in terms of the trade imbalances with China, and we've talked about this on the show quite a bit, we've had specific examples of where China makes a lot of money by not having to obey the same types of environmental regulations we have in the West. So why don't we tariff products for ecological parity between the East and West?
There you go. That's my point.
Exactly, Billy.
Sure.
And it's always been my major pet peeve.
That's right.
Those people who chase away industry out of the United States of America because it's dirty and then run down to the box store and buy made in China because it's cheap, they're the ones that should pay.
By the way, just as a side note, we've always used the Levi Strauss pair of pants as the example of what you'd be willing to buy if it was made in America. Just a side note, the lady who was in charge of Kohl's department stores has now changed her gig. She's now become the head of Levi Strauss & Company.
Oh, I saw that this last week, yeah.
So I just find that interesting that she's gone from a company that's buying and making clothes all around the world in third world countries. Now she's in charge of Levi Strauss, the company that said they wanted to bring some of their industry back to the United States.
That's great. I always thought in this country too, we should have had for large e-commerce sites, have a section like Made in America, because you could just index it. If you have a meta tag on your like where stuff's made, and if I want to say I only want to look at Made in America products, or I want to made in Western Europe, I can see that.
You won't be able to buy much.
Amazon adopted that. Imagine what a difference that would make.
There you go.
But you can't do it with meat. Because of the World Trade Organizations, the fight for a mandatory country of origin labeling for meat is failing.
Well, you know why?
Because
Smithfield Farms is now owned by China.
There you go.
The largest pork producer in the world.
Well, and you look at McDonald's, they used to be 100% USA beef, right, on their ads. Their stuff, it comes from, they don't know what animal it came from. It comes from all over the world and blended together.
They don't even know what part of the animal.
They can't even claim it's beef.
A hind quarter from one cow. They can take a ham from a pig. Who knows what?
But have you noticed that they don't even advertise it's 100% beef anymore?
Yeah.
I find that alarming.
Well,
okay.
Look,
so
we're going
to take a quick break. When we come back, we have Jonty and we have Billy. Oh my goodness, their stories coming up. Stay tuned.
The following is a special message from KSCO owner Michael Zwirling.
Recently on a KSCO Saturday special, a caller made a disturbing veiled threat to a frequent caller and occasional guest whose political views are totally different from his. I let it pass at the time, but should not have, hence this commentary. What has our country come to? Is civility dead, replaced by toxic talk and threats of violence? It certainly seems so, given the fact that talk radio, like social media, seems to be deteriorating more each day into nasty people, I call them trolls, sniping at each other with such ugly negativity that I am starting to ask myself if I really even want to be any part of this. When social platforms such as Twitter and YouTube first started to censor conservative opinion, the cries went out far and wide that conservative people were having their First Amendment right to freedom of speech violated. That kind of talk drove me crazy because these media platforms, like KSCO Radio, are private businesses, not subject to First Amendment protection of free speech. The owners of those businesses have the exclusive right to make the rules for their own business. And if people don't like those rules, they can choose not to use the business. People just didn't get it, and many of them still don't. Fast forward to now, nearly 32 years after I became the owner of KSCO Radio, a station that I have always proudly operated as the ultimate beacon of free speech, a voice for everyone who chooses to use it. The last place that would censor people, even those with whom I vehemently disagree. And yet, I personally did just that last Saturday when a frequent annoying caller said he would report me to the FCC if I were ever to change my policy and censor him, another fool who doesn't get it. But I am the ultimate hypocrite, or am I? Back in 2019, we got rid of a talented and popular local host who had started to attract attention to our station and accolades from Nazis and white supremacists from all over the world. When that host left, so did the toxic, hate-filled callers. I made it clear at the time that it had become necessary to change our slogan from a voice for everyone to a voice for everyone except race baiters and those who spew hate of any kind. Here's the bottom line of this commentary. If you can't be civil and refrain from threatening people with whom you disagree politically, then don't call this radio station. We at KSCO are not interested in advancing talk of violence or toxic talk of any kind. The world is dangerous enough without us fanning the flames and making it even worse. For KSCO and KOMY, I'm Michael Zwirling.
Satisfy your hunger with a fresh, prepared, twice-daily grab-and-go sushi you'll find waiting for you at Sushi Market Sprouts, 2 blocks from the beach at 300 7th Avenue in Santa Cruz. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
Hello, I'm Junko, and I look forward to serving you at the Sushi Market Sprouts.
Woman with a lighter. This is China Watch Radio. It's a very special rectification election edition of the China Watch Radio Show. Rectification meaning that Xi Jinping is busy setting out to rectify the thinking of the Chinese Communist Party. It having gone astray with people like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, and pursuing money and building industries and getting rich and
participating in the world.
Participating in the world, and by golly, Xi Jinping is going to take them to task and rectify them in the great tradition of Chairman Mao. So, that compared to our election, which, is in effect a rectification.
Every 4
not
years?
Much, every 2 years we rectify the situation. Not much happened when it gets right down to it in this rectification of the United States. So we're pretty much plugging along right down the same path we've been taking for the last 2 years.
The key difference, though, which the reason why I love this country, is that it occurs from the base of the pyramid as opposed to the tip.
Absolutely.
That's right.
We're rectifying ourselves instead of getting rectified.
Again? Yeah. Say that again,
I'm not sure that's true if you look at the financing.
Well, no, of course not.
That's a very interesting concept that I just saw a piece about why Vladimir Putin is murdering all the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly why. It's right. Because they run everything like they do here. They pour all the money into the elections, and they pretty much determine who does what.
I saw a great analysis from David Axelrod the other day, who was President Obama's campaign chair, right? And he was pointing. He had several good examples from both political parties how the electorate generally just becomes numb after a few commercials. You could spend $1 billion on a congressional race and it'll make no difference. That there's some races where we're spending hundreds of dollars per vote and it's not moving the needle.
Well, what's going to happen here. It's funny you should mention that because I'm thinking about all the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to go into Georgia.
Oh, boy.
And the needle ain't going to move but a quarter of a point either way.
Yeah.
Unless something happens.
Well, that's what I mean.
Unless something happens.
My point is that the electorate, though, is pretty sharp. I mean, we like to make fun of, the P.T. Barnum quote. I think he said this wasn't attributed to him, but it is, I think.
A sucker is born every...
No, that nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American
exactly.
people.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of a funny, cynical thing to say. But in reality, though, the electorate has really shepherded this country in a fairly good direction for 250 years.
By bouncing off each other and by rectifying every 2 years in a very peaceful way.
As citizens, we do this.
As citizens. Whereas in China, when Mao went about rectifying the Chinese Communist Party, it took him 3 years and he killed 10,000 of his cadre.
Well, and the most recent coronation in China, they say, well, it's a 5-year, it's his third, 5-year term, but we all know he's in it now forever until he dies.
Yeah.
So at any rate, we have basically two different directions. We see China being really, really focused on communist purity, and which means that it's a total centralized government with the power being at the very top, and everybody below that paying tribute to that power.
On several occasions, I stood in Tiananmen Square, and I stared up at that giant portrait of Mao, and my God, it's just epic in size. And I thought, wow, I mean, the symbolism of him looking down and the government looking down upon you, the yoke that's on your neck.
And the interesting part of that, it's still there.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah.
How long before Xi Jinping replaces
with his picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe right next to it, probably.
So the question is, how do we go about justifying these two worlds? One that's run pretty much from the bottom up, and one that's run pretty much from the top down.
Yeah.
Is this going to work? How can we pull this together? That is the question for the second hour of the show, which is your section of the show. Right now, we're going to go to Billy and to Jonty. And I think, Billy, you're up first. You have a 76-page...
let me tell you,
it's a tome.
I'm sort of a naive when I look at some of the topics. And I'm fascinated by fishing, and I'm fascinated by the South Pacific and the South China Sea. So... I lived out there for many years, and so I thought, well, I'll talk about the fishing thing. It's a good story. The Spratly Islands are part of the Philippines.
You stepped into 5 hours of show prep.
And let me tell you something. I have
rabbit hole.
17 pages. I looked at the Spratly Islands, and I looked up the Stevenson Ocean Security Project, which is a project that trying to illuminate the South China Sea's fishing fleets, the dark fishing fleets. There are many fishing fleets out there that fish, and then there's some that they're just out there and they don't appear to fish. There's a lot of boats, and they just sort of don't do much. But I think surveillance is what they're doing. But anyway, the South China Sea has emerged as one of the most dangerous flashpoints in the Indo-Pacific over the last decade, and it is because of fishing or not fishing. Now, there's a big fight, fishing-wise, between Taiwan and China. They're two separate fishing fleets. And the Taiwanese are somewhat infamous for overfishing.
Poaching.
Overfishing is a nicer way to put it.
Yeah.
With the previous segment, we talked about culling, and now we're talking about poaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so the big fight is over sovereignty of the fishing areas. And the Philippines, the Spratly Islands in the Philippines are very interesting because, as you may know, the Philippines is not a particularly rich country. They have some resources. One of them is fish. And they... back in the day, they had a great deal of money coming in from the United States government for Subic Naval Base and Clark Air Base. And those two facilities are gone.
A lot of which went into the Marcos's pockets and not into economic development.
Right. But anyway, that money's gone now because of Mount Pinatubo reared its ugly head and put lava all over everything.
Thankfully for U.S. taxpayers.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, so now we're talking about this big quagmire of fishing rights and fights about that. And when I talk about the fights, I'm talking about Taiwan, China, Australia, New Zealand, and a whole bunch of little countries all fighting over the fishing rights.
Wow.
And lately, it's come up that, there's a big, ugly story about the Galapagos Islands and how the fishing fleet has been quietly hanging out,
Encircling
the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador, and taking all the fish.
Yeah.
And didn't the U.S. Coast Guard just
Yes.
lose a face-off with that Chinese
Yes,
fleet?
they did. Not enough. The United States Coast Guard did not have enough firepower to stop them.
Yeah, they just ignored, told them to go away, and
Yeah, and they
fishing
didn't
around
follow it. Anyway, so I started out by looking at this story and going, "Wow, this is amazing," and it kept going. Did you know that more than 50% of the fishing vessels in the world operate in the South China Sea? 50%.
well, they eat seafood there like we eat beef.
That's right.
Here in the United States.
Well, the thing about it too is that, look, we all
And there's
practice,
a lot of hungry people, too.
lot of
well, we
people.
all practice some kind of conservation when we do things. At least the responsible parties do. Mm-hmm. But we have overfished the world's oceans so much now that there are entire species that we have been eating for generations that are just about gone. And it's amazing how little of these resources are left.
In fact, I saw a documentary in Japan where they were looking at the tuna harvest. Because it's such an important diet in Japan, and that they're not finding. If they find a jumbo tuna, a large tuna like they did years ago, it's highly prized because you just can't find them anymore. They've been fished out.
Right.
Everything's small.
In fact, one of the
Everything's
few
small
places
now.
where you can find those big tuna are off the coast of the United States.
Yeah.
Actually, coral reefs, where many of the fish that they catch depend on food themselves, they've been declining by 16% per decade.
Whoa.
16%? The
Percent.
coral reefs?
Coral reefs are disappearing by 16% every 10 years.
And
That's
is that
enormous.
is that related to fishing?
Well, that's related to fishing, and it's also related to what everybody's now referring to as climate change. I don't know.
And pollution.
Look, one of the big reefs that has been just completely almost destroyed by changing water temperature is the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
Okay? Even the reefs in Palau, some of the most pristine reefs in all of the world, are starting to deteriorate a little bit. The Marshall Islands, Truk, Palau, the reefs off New Zealand are also having a hard time.
And that's why Vanuatu went to the United Nations and said, give us money.
That's right. Dredging, clam harvesting of giant clam. Now, look, I've seen giant clams. I have 2 giant clam shells in my backyard my brother got when he found dead critters in the ocean. We brought the shells up. Took us all
Would
day.
you like to hear the true story of how I was almost eaten by a clam on the barrier reef?
Yeah. Look, that's
True story.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all because I've never seen a clamshell move that fast. I mean, these suckers are each half of a giant clamshell is like 200 pounds.
Yep. The clamshell was as wide as I am tall.
Yeah. No, I've seen those.
Yep.
I know you're telling the truth. And they're and boy, any little water movement over the top of those things, and they'll close, and they close fast for as big as they are. Wow. Really fast.
And that's how I was almost eaten by a giant clam off the barrier
You
reef.
experience the equilibrium of the food chain.
Over the last 5 years, in which giant clam harvesting, dredging, and artificial island building have severely damaged or destroyed 40,000 acres of reefs.
Holy camole. Wow.
40,000 acres of reef. Wow. Anyway, all of these things are coming together to point to a giant conflict over fishing rights in the South China
Well,
Sea.
there's asymmetric sizes of navies to enforce
Correct.
those rights.
And like I said, there are whole fleets of ships that would normally appear to be fishing fleets that aren't fishing and don't really look like fishing fleet boats.
Yeah. I guess that's one of the reasons I tossed this idea of Spratly Islands to Billy B. Was because I saw a YouTube of 1,000 fishing boats
Yeah.
in the Spratly Islands
Yeah.
that are not fishing.
They're not fishing.
1,000 fishing boats that are just there. And the reason they are there is to provide a blocking position in the South China Sea. So the Spratly Islands are right in the middle of the South China Sea,
That's right.
between Vietnam and the Philippines. And so the Chinese moved into these islands, parked 1,000 fishing boats that never fish.
Because if we're
Have you
here,
ever-
you can't be.
Have
That's
you ever
right.
heard-
And I told Billy that they're kind of like the offensive line on a football
That's right.
team.
That's exactly
Yeah,
what they are.
Yeah. Oh, good analogy.
Now, have you ever heard of a company called Costco?
Yeah,
not-
of
not
course.
not Costco,
Right.
Costco.
Yeah.
The shippers.
Okay, the shippers. China's fortress of warfare. The Costco ships spread globally now. China's main shipping company, one of the biggest shipping companies on the planet Earth. Well, it looks like this company's Chinese ships are, as we said, parked in bunches of places as like a defensive line.
And these are these massive container ships.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder if they're armed
Well, see, that's the question.
with fleets of drone,
Yeah.
suicide drones or something.
Anyway,
Yeah.
it's just-
At any rate,
that's sort of my.
it's it's scary. First of all, it's scary how hungry China is.
Yeah.
For power.
At
For
food.
food. For everything.
For food.
They're starving.
And they've destroyed their agriculture to the extent that they have to go outside themselves to feed themselves. Fish is one way of doing that. And they have these incredible fleets of fish, like we're talking about, that just pull into the Galapagos waters, stand a mile or so, just 10 feet outside the boundaries,
The limit.
and eliminate all the fish, catch them all.
Yeah.
And these fishing fleets stay out for a long. They don't catch a bunch of fish and go home.
No. They have by the way, they have smaller boats that offload to factory ships that then process
yes.
and send it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they are literally catching all the fish.
Well, that is the problem. And once you overfish a species in an area, it takes decades sometimes to come back.
Yeah.
And what happened to the snow crabs in Alaska?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. By the way,
Yeah.
they
Oops.
were there and they're almost gone. Well, it's time to I'm looking forward to Jonty's segment
Yeah,
today.
me
I
too.
really am.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, isn't this the kind of issue that if it was reported in the mainstream that would be very much a bipartisan sort of thing? I mean, both
Sure.
the left wing and
It
the
would.
right wing would be very in favor of trying to work various international treaties and or have our trade with China be contingent upon their adherence to a stricter environmental regimen with regards
Right.
to the treatment of the ocean.
Yes, but
Absolutely.
what percentage of the mainstream media does BlackRock own?
Well, I'm wondering. Yeah. I'm wondering. I think we're going to play the Biden clip at the next hour,
Yeah.
right? So
Top of the next hour.
So what is Biden going to say to Xi at the G20 conference coming up? I mean, will he bring up the fishing, overfishing? Will he bring up this territorial grab at sea?
Well, that's going to be a great opening for our next segment for sure. But right now we're going to go to Jonty, who has
By the way, I love Jonty's question.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question because my
Why-
father for years
yeah.
was involved with the Law of the Sea conference, and Jonty brings up a wonderful point.
So why don't we have your dad on this radio show talking about the law of the sea?
Well, it would be a great thing,
That'd be fun.
except my dad's. I have to tell you, my dad's almost 91 now, and his experience with the Law of the Sea was a long time ago, and I think times have changed. I don't think it's the same Law of the Sea anymore.
Well, it would be very interesting to see how they made a law of the sea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, Jonty, we've taken enough
Africa.
of your... Got to hear about this.
Yeah, well, I was very attracted to the title of this one video that we dug up. And just to remind our audience, all of the articles that we're talking about are available on ChinaWatchRadio.com. So you can join in, follow along, sign up for our newsletter. This video had the title "The Truth About China and Africa," which piqued my interest. However, I'd say about half the video was actually about Sri Lanka and the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka in particular, which was a port built on Sri Lanka. Of course, is in the Indian Ocean. It's just barely south of India. And it's very much in a strategic position because, like the Malacca Strait, a huge percentage of the world's trade passes very closely past it. A lot of people pointed to what happened with this port as evidence that China was practicing debt trap diplomacy, something that we've talked about quite a lot here. Essentially, there was a very large loan given to the Port Authority by the Chinese, something in the order of about $360 million. The port ended up not having any ships go to it because Sri Lanka already had a very nice port that most of the shippers in the world were used to using. As a result, the loans couldn't be paid back. And, according to the debt trap diplomacy narrative, the port was handed over to China. That's sort of a way of creating a shell of a story that isn't really the full story in order to push a certain narrative. Digging a little deeper into it, though, there was with regards to China taking over the port, there was no debt that was forgiven. There's no sovereignty ceded. There's no military base there. And then a couple other things about Sri Lanka in general. We saw Sri Lanka kind of fall apart recently because they didn't have enough dollars. Essentially, they couldn't acquire dollars to purchase goods from overseas that they desperately needed. For instance, oil
and toilet paper.
Yeah.
Sri Lanka owes more money to the World Bank than it does to China. They owe more money to Japan than they do to China. They owe more money to the Asian Development Bank than they do to China. So some of the video was trying to point out that some of this debt trap narrative, it doesn't all tie in neatly. It's not the sort of slam dunk that a lot of our Western coverage tends to think that it is.
Question, Johnny, though, although not all debtors are the same, some have much more aggressive collection policies or practices than others.
Right, exactly. And the video goes into to point out actually that it's the collection policies, but it's also on the other side. It's what's required of the nation or entity receiving the loan in order to qualify for the loan. So the World Bank and IMF have become increasingly less focused on infrastructure and more focused on things like family planning and education. Leaving a lot of countries in the lurch. They really need a railroad. They don't need a school or a family planning clinic. And also the World Bank.
We're not doing gender transition surgeries, are we?
Yeah.
Those aren't very popular in most of the rest of the world outside of Europe and the United States. Africa isn't. I'm sure that's very rare in Africa. Yeah. But in order to get a loan from the World Bank, you have to have you have to sort of dot all the I's. You have to be. It has to be a very specific thing that you're going to do, and you have to have a very specific reason to do it. The difference and something that this video did point out, which I thought was interesting, is they talk about how around about 2010, China had been going through this massive industrialization spree, and they'd been building a whole ton of infrastructure. But then they kind of started running out of legitimate infrastructure projects to pursue. Mm-hmm. And so they began to look abroad. And here they are with all of this experience building railroads and ports and airports and all this sort of stuff. And here's Africa saying, boy, we really need some railroads and ports and airports. And so they started coming up with these arrangements where, we really want our companies to keep rolling. We want them to keep building stuff. Why don't we come build stuff for you guys and we'll work something out? The Belt and Road is sort of painted as this organized plan, but it's really kind of a big mess. It's in the order of about 10,000 projects in 100 different countries. And when they negotiate the deals to build these projects, the concern isn't so much the sort of level of corruption within the country or whose back you have to scratch to get it done, or is this something that your country really needs? The concern is just how soon can we put shovels in the ground, because the Chinese objective is to keep their companies rolling. So they're quite happy to provide loans to various governments in order to just keep their businesses rolling. So the incentive is much different than the World Bank and IMF in that regard, and also because they are funding so many different projects, and they're not really looking at the details of the projects, and they're kind of okay with a little bit of embezzled funds and some corruption here and there. More of those projects are bound to fail. You're bound to end up with more Hambantota port-like situations where things end up having to be renegotiated. But in terms of the overt and malicious intent, we've got the Center for Global Development, the Lowy Institute, and Deborah Bodigam of Johns Hopkins. They're all sort of saying that most countries that take on Chinese debt can actually pay it back. They're not. The IMF had some number that 90% of the countries that take on debt are actually capable of paying it back. So it's not as simple as just painting it all debt trap diplomacy. It might be a little more complex, and it might be actually kind of a bit of a mess.
Wow.
So it sounds like it's kind of a little more of a broad spectrum tool as opposed to one specific widget in the toolbox.
But look at China around the world and how they're operating, and then you look at how it affects a continent like Africa.
Yeah.
Where does China get the money to fund all of these things? Because China gets its money.
Carbon offsets credits from the West.
Yeah. There you go. As I understand it, China has traditionally, the central government has got its money from local governments who have been selling the land for development.
Mm.
So all of this money from local governments that have been making local governments rich have been making the central government rich, and the central government then has been using this money to lend out to all of these Djibouti or someplace, here, we'll build you a skyscraper. What happens then when they can't pay that back? Oops, we ran out of money. No, we ran out of time.
Both.
Time is money, right?
Thank you, John T. Great piece.
Yeah, it was a great piece. We have one more hour of China Watch Radio. We invite you to call us up at 479-1080. We'll take a break for some news and traffic and weather and whatnot, and we'll be right back.
And guess who we're going to open up the next hour with?
Uncle Biden.
There you go.
Oh, I can't wait.
This is KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey.
On 6 minutes after 3 p.m., and that means it's time for the second hour of China Watch Radio.
China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitola Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
Woman with a lighter, ni hao ma. Folks, Xi Jinping, in keeping with the best tradition of Chairman Mao, has kicked off his rectification of the Chinese Communist Party here at their 20th Congress by getting rid of all of the people who didn't think correctly, namely Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao and their gangs. Cleaned them all out, get rid of them, and purify the thought of the Communist Party. Now, we had a rectification of our own here. We call it an election. And from that election, it doesn't appear there was much purifying going on, because we still think the way we think, and that's the way we want to think, which is good to me.
At least the people decided.
We decide,
Yes.
and not the person on top. And we pray that day never comes here in the United States. So today we're going to look at that, the way the two countries are shaping up, China from the top down, the United States from the bottom up. And we're going to try to figure out if these two countries can really figure out how to just get along. So let's start it off by our leader, Joe Biden.
He was at a press conference right after
Yesterday.
yesterday.
Yeah.
In fact, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And a reporter asked him a couple of questions regarding China. And here is that exchange.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions. One, shifting back to your trip to Asia. When you meet with President Xi Jinping of China, will you tell him that you're committed to defending Taiwan militarily? And what are you hoping to get out of this meeting that will make it a success? Are you willing to make any concessions to him?
Well, look, I'm not willing to make any fundamental concessions, because what I've told him in the beginning, and this is I've spent over 78, I think they told me, hours with him so far, 67 in person when I was vice president. President Obama knew he couldn't spend time with the vice president of another country, so I traveled 17,000 miles with him in China and around in the United States. I've met with him many times. And I've told him, I'm looking for competition, not conflict. And so what I want to do with him when we talk is lay out what kind of each of our red lines are, understand what he believes to be in the critical national interests of China, what I know to be the critical interests of the United States, and determine whether or not they conflict with one another. And if they do, how to resolve it and how to work it out. And so, and Taiwan doctrine has not changed at all from the very beginning. So I'm sure we'll discuss China, Taiwan, and I'm sure we'll discuss a number of other issues, including fair trade and relationships relating to his relationship with other countries in the region. And so anyway, so there's a lot we'll have to discuss. You want another question?
Yes,
Everybody else got one?
You didn't
Two or
say
three?
if you will tell Xi Jinping personally that you are committed to defending Taiwan.
I'm going to have that conversation with him.
There you go. That was President Joe Biden responding to a question about what he's going to say when he faces Xi Jinping.
And he pointed out that he's been across the table from the guy for a number of hours.
Yeah.
Do you know the first thing that struck me is that President Biden said, "I am," and instead of "we are."
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to hear "we are" instead of "I am," because when you say "I am," that's kind of like a centralized way of thinking about the world. When you say "we are," that's kind of more representative of who we are.
It's more of a broader position of strength.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I wanted to point out. The other was that he mentioned fair trade.
Yeah.
Now, I think fair trade was a Trumpism.
Indeed.
And I think Trumpism, when he dealt with China, brought up the whole concept of fair trade. Not interested in free trade anymore, want fair trade. So it's interesting to hear President Biden lay that Trumpism on the line. So do we have it? Are we ready to take phone calls?
Well, we've
I'd
got a
love to
bunch
hear
of them on the line, I'll tell you that.
In fact, we should remind folks, 831-479-1080.
Yes.
If you'd like to contribute.
And you have to agree with us.
No,
Well,
you don't have to
no,
agree with
no,
us.
no,
You
no,
should-
you don't?
No, you call and argue with us. That's what I want to hear.
They don't have to agree with us. And we'll probably find that out now, because we're going to talk to Dick in Santa Cruz, who was hanging on the longest. Dick, you're on China Watch Radio.
Yeah, Biden probably had to check in with Xi to see how much he has on him. Maybe he's going to send Kevin McCarthy some tapes, to the new.
Are you? Wait a minute. Are you suggesting that Xi Jinping would blackmail Joe
got
Biden
lots.
with some tapes?
There's no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and especially since he couldn't commit anything. Like he says these things that everybody forgets, and then he's in a new press conference in the new era, and he just changes the whole story, and won't say a thing. So obviously, G's been after him about that, and so he's backed off a couple of his extraordinarily dangerous statements, like we're going to, back Taiwan militarily. I forgot what he said exactly. But I was calling about that other thing that you were talking about, and that is, are we being blackmailed by China for reparations now for the climate? I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Well, that's very interesting because that's what is on the table. And our own climate czar, John Kerry, suggests that the way for us to assuage our guilt is to pay the developing countries of the nation. I think what is the plan? Jonty mentioned $100 billion or something like that a year.
Yeah. Well, you guys are aware of the overfishing by basically third world countries to the extent that they that's, if the environmentalists want to talk about anything, I would be in 100% agreement with the overfishing of the oceans. The carbon footprint and all this other garbage about climate change, which is just a scare tactic for the last 30 years on our youth. They all think they're going to die in 10 years, I guess now. But that's.
Well, what I have a challenge with this, Dick, is that. We were a gross polluter. Wind the clock back to the heat of the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the 20th century up to the mid part, and we polluted a lot. We dumped a lot of junk into toxins into rivers,
burning
and things.
Rivers.
But the thing is, a lot of it we didn't know any better, and the world didn't know any better, and our economy back then was a fraction of what a world economy is today.
You're not addressing my argument.
Well, hold on a minute. But the thing with China is that we now know better, and we have means of mitigating pollution. We have means of measuring fishing draws out of the ocean. We have means of, we understand how to manufacture things cleanly. We can do it in the West. It's just when a country that elects not to do it and then demands payment from us as an offset for that, I just find absolutely maddening.
It's absurd. It's completely absurd. And if anybody out there is a real environmentalist, just look at the destruction of our ocean fisheries. Just look at the hockey puck line, as they say, of the destruction of all the species, especially around South America, Africa, Asia.
Well, that's what I was talking about in the last hour.
Any place that doesn't have a Coast Guard, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Any place that doesn't have a Coast Guard probably doesn't have any fish.
If you have an asymmetric surface force, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
You need a police force to keep them honest.
Yeah, I mean they always like to say, "Oh, the cows are farting," right? And it's going to we're all going to die in 10 years. Well, you want. I mean, we will be eating bugs like they want us to at the World Health Organization, and because
a lot of protein in crickets.
Fish. Yeah, it will. The number one source of oxygen is from the algae and the so forth that grows in the ocean, and just like I forgot which guy just said that. The idea that if you start destroying the predator fish all the way down to the little fish, pretty soon the ocean's just one big desert.
Amen.
And I mean, if anybody wants to worry about environmental stuff, so the rest of the stuff you guys are talking about with China is just absurd.
Well, wait a minute. Now, both of these countries, the U.S. and China, have had rectifications in elections, and both of them have decided which direction they want to take. Now, China is very distinctly going into the purity of the central communist ethos, and it's going to get ugly over there. Now, we're kind of muddling along the way we've always been going. So, Dick, how are we going to resolve this relationship? How are we going to get along?
We can't. Biden, like he said, he's ignoring the public by not addressing that question from the press conference, saying that I will talk to Xi. That basically he's going to go over there, pull out his notepad, and, well, he probably can't even write anymore, have his people, there so they can take notes, and Xi is just going to tell him everything that he freaking wants.
Okay.
Yeah,
so your suggestion is that China will rule and we will follow. Okay.
Well,
thank you very much, Dick.
Thanks for the call, Dick. We appreciate it.
Guys, I have an interesting little fact here with regards to the fishing fleets. This is according to theconversation.com. Beijing claims to send around 26,000 vessels out to fish across the globe.
Wow.
But some maritime experts say this distant water fishing fleet may number nearly 17,000. By comparison, the United States has less than 100 distant water ships.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's because we have maintained our fisheries and do a pretty good job
we factory we
snow
have
crabs notwithstanding.
Didn't we delay salmon season this year by a few weeks because we were concerned about
But we also
populations?
have farm salmon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, don't talk about that.
Anyway, we have
Food chain guys unhappy.
Bill, who's a frequent caller of this program and often has some great things to say, is calling us from Salinas. So let's check in with Bill.
Bill,
Yes,
great
hi,
to hear
guys.
you.
I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you about your conversation about the reparations due to
Oh, good.
our
Yeah.
being such sinful people, right? And during my career, I had the good fortune of going through both a master's and a PhD program in environmental science, so I know a little bit about it. And I had a 7-year career with the World Meteorological Organization over in Switzerland. So anyway, there are
Tough duty, Bill. My goodness. Tough duty, Bill.
I know, but somebody's got to do it, right? Anyway, there are 5 greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and water vapor. Which is the most common, most prevalent?
Water vapor.
Water vapor. 95% of the greenhouse gas is water vapor. Less than 4% is CO2. And of the CO2, almost all of it comes from natural sources and always has come from natural sources.
Right, volcanic eruptions and things, right?
What's that?
Like volcanic eruptions and things,
So
right?
that too, but mostly from decaying organic material.
Yeah.
Yep.
Carbon cycle is built on CO2, oxygen, carbon that goes around and around, right? So anything that decays is going to produce CO2 from the ocean,
of course,
forests, from every place. So anyway, so when you get right down to the nitty gritty, our contribution to the greenhouse gases is pretty minuscule, 2 parts in 1,000, something like that, for human contributions. And so it's almost ridiculous to think that all the money we want to spend on going to electric cars and all this stuff is going to have any difference at all. The paleoclimatologists tell us that in past interglacial periods there was more CO2 than there is today. So the world has gone through these cycles, and it's much to do about nothing, actually. So
in fact, I've shared previously on the program. I had a prior career in automotive engineering and working on fuel systems for vehicles, and a lot of people now, the combustion process is now so efficient that the exhaust systems are all built out of stainless steel because there's so much water as a byproduct. If you have a perfect combustion process, you almost exclusively have water as the byproduct. And so you see cars now, and like when they're pulling uphill, all that liquid, that's water that's in the muffler, all drains out the back. Especially in the morning, you see lots of water coming out people's tailpipes. But we've actually gotten very efficient at burning fossil fuels and getting every drop of energy we can out of that fuel.
Yeah, we're not polluting when we produce CO2.
Yeah,
that's my point. Is that it's a natural thing. You guys, somebody mentioned worry about the rainforests and not producing as much oxygen. That NOAA has been tracking what's going on in the Earth for about 50 years in space, and during all that time, one thing has been constant: the Earth is getting greener. So
because of all the carbon dioxide.
Well, carbon dioxide, and as the Earth gets a little warmer, you have more evaporation, more precipitation, you have moisture. All of the things that contribute to making things grow are happening. We should be overjoyed in what's going on, not worry about gloom and doom. it's just the opposite. You know, the
Well, Captain Bill, you know, your very precise description of what's going on raises a very interesting question.
Yeah.
What the hell's going on then?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
take for example, Mr. Gore. Mr. Gore is not a scientist, right? He's not an environmentalist. I think he took one course in college, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what has happened? Mr. Gore has gotten rich and famous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
go ahead, Bill.
Is that what this is all about? Money?
Money. Yeah.
So my grandfather used to say.
Bill, do you remember Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth when it came out? Was it 2000, I think, was it, or 2001?
Yeah, we're over by now.
Yeah. Well, I remember, watching that movie, right? San Francisco was going to be, half water, right? Most of it, right? Santa Cruz is going to be gone, right? I mean, these predictions of, the beach. If you live on a hill, have beachfront property.
Right.
None of that turned out to be true, and so at some point, people still buy the hysteria.
Not one thing that Gore predicted came to pass.
No.
There are more polar bears than ever. They're not extinct. The Arctic Ocean never went ice-free. Manhattan never went underwater. None of it. Not one thing.
Well,
and yet people continue to buy into it over and over again. It just amazes me. And when these countries, like you mentioned Vanuatu earlier, and of course they say that, sea level's rising. Sea level has been rising actually for about 18,000 years.
Yes.
Right? Here in Monterey Bay, we have a tide gauge, and it's been measuring sea level rise ever since they put it in. And it's been very constant, about 1.47 millimeters per year.
Well, we had glaciers that went. I'm sorry, Bill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had glaciers that went all the way down to the Midwest of the United States. I mean, that's how the Great Lakes were carved. I mean, they used to have a lot of ice on this planet, and things have been melting back long before there were human beings.
That's right. Sea level has risen 125 meters on average, the scientists say. I don't know. It varies all over the place, but it's risen a lot since the onset of our interglacial period, and it's going to continue until we start the next glacial period. That's part of ongoing cycles. But it's minuscule. It's only a few inches per 100 years, and the people are paranoid. They get all excited, like the world's ending. It reminds me of the story about the skies falling.
Well, it is the story of the sky is falling. Absolutely.
What I'm reminded of when I hear Bill speak is that, let's be smart and not pollute, right? Let's have a clean environment. Yeah. Let's not, let's use common sense. But, let's actually, not go too far over the other end where.
Well, I think Bill's point is well taken when he says, that we've got all this,
right.
These legislation about electric cars and all this stuff, and the power grid can't handle the electricity now.
No, and there's the scientific foundation of that is a little suspect as well.
So, Bill, given the fact that this is all hooey for dollars, what do we do to combat it? Because if we don't do something, they'll use it to who knows what. The guilt that they are piling on is so powerful.
Well, wait a minute, though. We just had an election where I don't know about what was on your ballot, but my ballot from where I live in Watsonville had a bunch of proposition things on it. If we really want to stop them from forcing us to drive electric cars, we could always get together and put a ballot proposal on the thing as people and say, hey, we don't want to do this.
Especially since those electric cars have AM radios anymore.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, you got a 3-pointer call. Thank you very much.
That was a 3-point call.
Yeah, Bill, always a treasure when you call.
I just want to say that if Bill's wrong, he has to pay the reparations.
There you go, Bill. How do you like that?
Good luck with that.
Thanks for the call, sir. All right, let's move on. I think we got time to take one more call before the bottom of the hour break. Let's check in with Downtown Al, who's really not in downtown. He's out in Watsonville today. Al, you're on China Watch Radio.
Hey, guys, great show. I just want to say something about Biden. I think that guy's too compromised to negotiate with the Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we're to believe anything from the Hunter Biden laptop, I think there might be something there. And, it doesn't take much to compromise people. My dad was a contract negotiator for the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
But, he'd tell me some of the things that they would try, like when he went to Lockheed or something, they would hide the register in the cafeteria in the hopes that they could pawn off a free lunch on you, and he would have to search and search and search for it. It'd backfire at that point because then he was resentful, but it doesn't take much sometimes to compromise people, and oftentimes it's done by giving away resources that aren't your own.
That's it.
Like
tax money.
Exactly. Yeah. And that really infuriates me. But, besides that, though, this whole thing, the environmental movement, rightly so, has been more of like a Western values type of thing, partly because, of the Industrial Revolution, like you were talking about, and we learned how to hopefully manage some of the damage that we did. But also, if you look back and you read some of the Dickens novels and whatever, that were trying to get class changes to where the poor were treated better in the Industrial Revolution, I remember coming across books when I was a kid where there were the same sorts of books, but they were about treating animals right, about a cart horse that was abused and a dog and a cat. They'd kind of anthropomorphize them for the reader. But, the English were so much in the forefront of animal welfare and rights. And I don't think that's part of the Chinese perspective in a lot of ways, going back a long ways. I was reminded of one article I read about the new art movement in China, and this one woman had gotten hundreds and hundreds of thousands of snakes that she had gotten somebody to catch, and she nailed them up on the wall while they were still alive. So it was this writhing, horrific art display. Yeah. And, it's something that just goes beyond communism in terms of like it's a different mentality. And I think we always need to look at kind of like what our roots are and how things like that work. It isn't just the political systems. And in fact, the political systems can be a reflection of people's background.
Right. It's interesting you bring up the thing about the snakes because early on in our program, we had, several shows when we talked to Amy Howe about how she was treated when the communists came and forced her to disavow her parents and all of that sort of thing. And that sort of thinking comes to mind when you talk about nailing live animals on a wall as an art project.
I'm not sure about that though, Al. Simply because, when you talk about the cultural heritage of the Han Chinese, that's 8,000 years of history. That's really deep, and it's in many respects it's very respectful of others, and it's very Confucian, and it has a lot of spirituality to it as well. And then came the communists, and we have to take a break.
I can tell you that's definitely an interplay, because the fact that you don't respect your parents, that definitely goes against their cultural history. Yeah.
Can you stick with us, Alan?
Definitely imposed on them by communists.
Can you stick with us for a few minutes?
Sure.
Oh, good. Okay. So we should remind folks, too, we've got some open lines, 831-479-1080.
All right, and we'll take a break. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes.
Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito. Easy in and out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
The following is a special message from KSCO owner Michael Zwerling.
Recently on a KSCO Saturday special, a caller made a disturbing veiled threat to a frequent caller and occasional guest whose political views are totally different from his. I let it pass at the time, but should not have, hence this commentary. What has our country come to? Is civility dead, replaced by toxic talk and threats of violence? It certainly seems so, given the fact that talk radio, like social media, seems to be deteriorating more each day into nasty people, I call them trolls, sniping at each other with such ugly negativity that I am starting to ask myself if I really even want to be any part of this. When social platforms such as Twitter and YouTube first started to censor conservative opinion, the cries went out far and wide that conservative people were having their First Amendment right to freedom of speech violated. That kind of talk drove me crazy because these media platforms, like KSCO Radio, are private businesses, not subject to First Amendment protection of free speech. The owners of those businesses have the exclusive right to make the rules for their own business. And if people don't like those rules, they can choose not to use the business. People just didn't get it, and many of them still don't. Fast forward to now, nearly 32 years after I became the owner of KSCO Radio, a station that I have always proudly operated as the ultimate beacon of free speech, a voice for everyone who chooses to use it. The last place that would censor people, even those with whom I vehemently disagree. And yet, I personally did just that last Saturday when a frequent annoying caller said he would report me to the FCC if I were ever to change my policy and censor him, another fool who doesn't get it. But I am the ultimate hypocrite, or am I? Back in 2019, we got rid of a talented and popular local host who had started to attract attention to our station and accolades from Nazis and white supremacists from all over the world. When that host left, so did the toxic, hate-filled callers. I made it clear at the time that it had become necessary to change our slogan from a voice for everyone to a voice for everyone except race baiters and those who spew hate of any kind. Here's the bottom line of this commentary. If you can't be civil and refrain from threatening people with whom you disagree politically, then don't call this radio station. We at KSCO are not interested in advancing talk of violence or toxic talk of any kind. The world is dangerous enough without us fanning the flames and making it even worse. For KSCO and KOMY, I'm Michael Zwirling.
We are back, and we have Downtown L, and downtown is Watsonville L.
Anyway, I don't know if I'm on the air right now.
Yes, you are indeed.
Live on.
Yeah, I didn't want people to construe that I'm being disparaging about the Chinese culture because there's obviously so many admirable things about it, but there are also differences which could be problematic, just like there are in any society. For example, I think they can be more collectivist than we are, and that can be very, very useful a lot of times when a society pulls together and gets certain things done and supports each other. And whereas we tend to go off in a whole bunch of different directions, it's like herding cats or something, and we're at different odds when we maybe should be pulling together on certain projects instead of like always declaring our American individualism.
But it's interesting, Al, though, is that they actually protest a little differently. It tends to be a passive-aggressive quality in the culture tends to permeate to the top, where people drag their feet or they just lie down.
Or they stand in front of the tank and don't move.
Exactly. Pretend they didn't understand you. There's all kinds of things they do to voice an objection without objecting.
But, Al, you bring up a very interesting suggestion that the Chinese pull themselves together and work collectively, and we here in the United States are, oh, heck with you, I'm going to do it my own way. That's really reflected in the rectification campaign Xi Jinping is exercising right now, where he's getting rid of everybody that doesn't toe the line and think exactly like he does, and our election where everybody went their own way.
But that's kind of where I was going, though, that there's an appearance of being unified in China when they've been purified, rectified, or in a work camp if they disagree.
Right.
And so people know to acquiesce. They just shut up and look down and, let it blow over.
That's how I got through the Navy.
Yeah.
Swab the deck, sir.
What I'm saying, though, is, these cultural differences can be misused and they can be, manipulated in not always positive ways, even though ultimately, as they evolved, they probably were kind of a positive thing for survival. with irrigation systems or whatever. It's good to have a lot of people who can cooperate and share that water and work together to maintain the canals and ditches and this type of thing.
Okay.
Al, we appreciate the call. We're running out of time here, and I got a bunch of other calls we're going to get to.
Oh, if I could just say one last thing.
Sure.
I voted for Trump for environmental reasons because I know that in the West we do a better job by handling our pollution and industrial processes. And, a lot of people just don't get it. And I think the whole environmental movement has really been co-opted by people who have,
socialist
ulterior
ambitions.
motives.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
3-pointer for Al.
Thank you, Al. All right, let's move on. We have Dan in Pacific Grove. You're on China Watch Radio.
Hey, Dan.
Hello? Dan, you there?
Dan,
you're live.
The man.
Dan in Pacific Grove, you there?
Or he's on mute.
He might be on mute, but he's hot on the air here.
Well, put him on.
Put him back on hold, and we'll
pick up somebody
take
else.
who's next. Dan, we're going to put you on hold. We'll catch you in a minute.
He went to the bathroom.
Probably.
Okay, I don't know if I can put him on hold from the live board. Let's try Andres in Royal Oaks.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Andres.
Just wanted to see if either I could rectify some of your comments or if you could, maybe you can...
I was waiting for that one, Andres.
We've been taking rubber hoses to Billy all afternoon. It's not working.
It's my understanding that the moon doesn't have a dark side. So there's a far side and a close side, but there is no dark side. Is that something you guys are familiar with?
Well, I understand that the moon does not rotate, so there's one side that's always cold.
And it's actually it's really beat up as well. It has significantly more craters in it than the other side.
There's one side that faces us all the time, and there's one side that doesn't.
Right, and sometimes we have a new moon, and when we have a new moon, it's facing us. That same side is facing us, but it's dark, and then the opposite side it has the light. Does that make sense? Like when we have a quarter moon, when half of the moon is showing, right?
Yeah, but the part that's lit is consistent.
Yeah, but what we're looking at, though, is the moon in relation to where it is where we are on Earth.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
But the moon itself in relation to Earth does not turn away from us. So that there's always one side that's dark.
No, because it's not always dark. It's just always far from us, but it's not always dark.
Yeah.
It's like a... You remember that guy, representative from Illinois, that thought that islands would float? You shouldn't put too many people on one side because it might tip over.
Yeah,
I do remember that. Yeah.
I remember him. Is he still in power, by the way?
Yeah.
Yes.
They're still electing him, aren't they?
Yeah, people just, they don't pay attention to some stuff. And the moon, there is a far side, but there is no dark side. I think the cold spots are going to be the poles.
Well,
not
right.
One side or the other.
What you're referring to is the fact that the other side of the moon that we never see, that we call the dark side, actually sees the sun.
Yes.
Yeah, I get that. I understand what you're saying.
Okay. I'm glad I rectified your thinking.
Yes.
There you go. Now, wait a minute, Andreas.
Yes, sir.
If you
Go
were
ahead.
going to colonize the moon,
Yeah.
which would you take, the North Pole or the South Pole?
I'd have to study the moon a little bit more. I'm not sure if there's any mineral advantages one way or the other. But
I'd take the North Pole. You know why? I'd hope I hope it'd be a second outpost for Santa Claus, and I'd find everything I wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that the water is probably on the south side.
That's what I heard too.
And if you can get to that water, you can make rocket fuel. Wow.
That means what? Then you can go where?
To Mars.
Some other
To
barren
Mars.
By the way,
planet
did you
in
guys
the solar system.
The other week, Musk was wearing that shirt. Remember the Occupy Wall Street, craze that was on?
Yeah.
He's got Occupy Mars.
The guy.
There was a strategic reason for China picking the far side of the moon just to put in their spice stuff. They wanted to.
They wanted to hide out.
Quiet.
Well, it is also we've talked about this on the show too. So there, what I call is the plus one mentality. So whatever we've done in our past, China's going to do plus one, right? We built the Hoover Dam; they're building the Three Gorges Dam. We built the Panama Canal; they're building a wider Panama Canal. We landed on the moon; they're going to land on what we call the dark side or the far side of the moon, right? It's always try to do kind of plus one to trump us on something.
Don't they own the current Panama Canal?
Yeah. They're
so when they build a bigger Panama Canal, they're going to close the old one or maybe sell it.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to say goodbye to Andres because it sounds like
Andres.
he's loading coal in a
he's trying
bin
to sell
or
it
something.
to China.
Anyway, thanks for calling. I think we have Dan back on the line. This time maybe it'll work. Let's see if we push the button here. Dan, you're on China Watch Radio. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon. I hear you very well.
Excellent.
Good. On your side. So a little different topic regarding China. Back to that issue subject. But early on, a while ago, you had the recording of Biden speaking about his intentions in regards to upcoming talks with China.
Yes.
And Biden made reference to something. It's not clear to me. He's made reference to the Taiwan Doctrine. Now, it's not clear to me which Taiwan Doctrine he's referring to. Is it I assume he's talking about United States foreign policy. So was it the one from?
He's talking about he's referring to the one China policy.
Yeah. There's several doctrines. I didn't hear him connect those two phrases, but the one doctrine clearly is that the United States, going back to the Carter administration, early 1979, the U.S. does not recognize the existence of the Republic of China and agrees with the People's Republic of China that Taiwan is part of China. The other doctrine still knocking around is the Taiwan Relations Act, which promotes sale of military items from the U.S. to China and some other provisions supportive of Taiwan. And the third doctrine I'll point out, which I would call the Biden doctrine based on his actions, so that's fair, is that for Joe Biden, whatever is supportive of the People's Republic of China and their alliance with the drug cartels, he's for. He keeps supporting it, and that's what he does. So that's the Biden doctrine also. But just in reference to the Taiwan doctrine, there's more than one.
Well, yeah, no, I think he was clearly the first, because the question was about the defense of Taiwan. And we have to just remind the audience as well is that we recognize that we have the one China policy, but that's if the people of Taiwan agree. It has to be a peaceful, right? We've read the whole doctrine at one point on the show a few weeks ago, but it has to be a peaceful and agreeable reunification.
There is
the
one China.
both
Chinas want one China.
I disagree with that statement because one of the provisions on the table, reaching back to the Nixon administration, negotiating with the People's Republic of China, they agreed upon everything that came into play except one thing, which Ford administration carried forward with, which is holding to the U.S. position that the People's Republic of China needs to promise to not invade Taiwan militarily. The big diplomatic coup of the Carter administration was to drop that provision and agree to all three of the PRC's provisions.
We actually read the doctrine.
Whatever our politicians say, that's not part of the agreement.
Well, we've actually read the doctrine on the program here a few weeks ago, and it clearly said that it had to be a peaceful reunification. I'm paraphrasing.
If both Chinas don't agree to the peaceful unification, then we don't agree to it.
We don't recognize the reunification.
But as it stands today, we do not recognize the existence of the Republic of China.
That's correct.
And now, when you say the doctrine, are you referring to the written agreement between the United States and the People's Republic of China in 1979, or statements of our politicians, which doesn't very much?
No, we're talking about the official written agreement.
What sort of conditions attached to that statement of that we would do or not do something?
I don't think there were.
We've already severed relations with Taiwan.
Well, I think there were implied consequences that we would recognize Taiwan, and we've said that we would defend and support Taiwan. We've certainly have said that we will supply them with arms to defend themselves, and we've had the president himself say here a few months ago that the United States would actually come to the aid of Taiwan, which
that was in the Taiwan Relations Act.
Yeah,
but not part of. Was that part of the?
Well, he said that as
agreement with China.
Well, no, he said that as in response to a reporter's question, which really knocked everybody off guard because he kind of said what everybody believed to be true, but nobody would admit.
And I think part of the discussion that you're hearing in the press more recently than we've had in the past is because Taiwan, the Republic of China, ROC, represents a democracy, and also it represents strategic. It's a strategic location for trade. The Taiwan Straits is important. That's why we send military ships through there once in a while to make sure that the navigational lane is open so that shipping can go in and out of there in that part of the world.
I've been through there quite a bit, actually, on U.S. ships, container ships. It's a busy place.
Yeah, exactly.
And but yeah, it's sometimes difficult to separate the statements that U.S. politicians make, which lack veracity for the large part, and the written agreements in effect that we put into place.
May I throw in a notion here? It's perfectly legal for politicians to lie.
Oh yeah, it's condition. It's part of the job requirement, it seems.
Yeah. There's no law that says politicians can't lie. So there you go. They can say whatever they want.
I think I'd like to turn that around and say that there's no law that says they can't not tell the truth.
But as citizens, it is it's incumbent on us to not confuse the statements of politicians with facts.
Amen. You're absolutely right. And
whatever shading they throw on it,
Yeah.
Voluminous.
Thanks for calling back when we didn't get any audio from you the first time. We appreciate your call, man.
That's a 3-pointer.
Yeah, that was really a thoughtful call. I appreciate that.
We haven't had any 2-pointers in a while.
No. Scary.
Let's find out about what Ted has to say from Scotts Valley. Ted, you're on China Watch Radio.
Thank you. The moon is bright on both sides from as far as the sun's concerned.
Yes.
There's no more water on there's no dark side per se.
No, we established that.
Yeah.
It's only dark to us here on the Earth.
Exactly.
Fine, okay, but the point is, that's a fundamental fact, and your facts are often very wrong, and it's disturbing.
Oh.
That nobody on your show, none of your other hosts caught that mistake.
No, we're politicians.
Yes.
It's valid.
Well,
now, back on the other scientific facts, one caller claimed that CO2 is 4% of the atmosphere. How come you didn't correct that?
I didn't know how much it is. How much is it?
0.04 at the most.
I'm not sure if that's exactly what he said.
0.04 is 4%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you say? He said it was 4%,
very
didn't
little. And water vapor is between 0 and 3% at the most, depending on when it's raining and all that good stuff. And NOAA's facts, are very clear. Climate change is real. Carbon dioxide causing more heat damage on the atmosphere and in the oceans is very real.
Well,
continuing to be a threat.
No, we acknowledge that the pollution in the oceans is real, and that pollution is a material effect on the planet. In fact,
CO2 in the atmosphere causes the oceans to warm up and causes more problems. And it's an exasperating problem over a long period of time.
I'm sorry, I'm unclear on what you're unhappy about.
Well, he suggested.
I'm unhappy that you make scientific claims, call and make scientific claims, and the facts don't jive. And
Well,
you're not
wait a
calling
minute.
it
Wait. We didn't make any scientific claims.
Yeah.
But no, you did. You said the moon had water on the dark side.
And
we said it was on the
did
South Pole.
And not only that, we also clarified the fact that the moon is lit all the time. It's just dark to us because we're on the other side.
You didn't do so at the time the claim was made. That was later in the show.
Okay, later in the show counts, sir.
Okay. Listen. People call us and make all kinds of claims.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Sometimes we know what we're talking about and we'll call it on them. Other times we have to rely on people like you to call and disagree. And that's the nature of what we do. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
You as the host made the claim. You make the claim that there's not enough electricity to run the electric cars.
That's a fact. That is a fact, sir.
Prove it.
Because I will. Governor Newsom just 2 months ago said that stop charging electric cars in the evening because we do not have enough
power.
We don't have the 12 years or 15 years to make more power plants that we need anyway.
How many? Okay, let me ask you something, sir. How many power plants have been built in California in the last 20 years?
About 3.
Okay,
I know
3.
Only geothermal.
Okay. Let's just look at the facts. Right now, they can't keep the power grid on when we turn on too many air conditioners. They tell us to. So what I'm telling you is that if everybody in this state was required to have a car that charged on the current electrical grid, there's not enough electricity.
Yeah. Well,
and there wouldn't be enough electricity to pump all the gas that you need too, if that was true.
Okay.
Because gas stations need electricity to pump gas.
Well, I would go along with you. I think put it down for just a second here. Yeah, I would go along with you in your assertion that we do have climate warming because the glaciers, as David was saying, have been receding for a long time. That means it's warmer.
Sure.
And the glaciers are disappearing.
Absolutely.
Does that mean that we're going to die in 10 years like we're being
told
by people like Al Gore? I don't think so. Because if we had listened to Al Gore and his inconvenient truth, we'd probably already be underwater.
Right.
So it's the fear and the paranoia and the guilt that they're pitching on global warming that is really the unsettling thing because it's destructive of our national psyche. That's just my thought.
Was a prediction of the future. The future is never a certain thing. We made a lot of progress in climate, over the years since Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, and the numbers have should be updated accordingly. Going back to an old claim, is you can go back to Rachel Carson's springtime thing.
Who?
Her claims, were at the time.
Well, we've
talking about Silent Spring.
Yeah, we have AOC who says we're going to die in another 10 years, right? 2 years ago, it was 12 years.
He said no such point.
We'll try, sir. Let me try to help you here. Here's the thing: if we have in the future a problem with a fact we don't know about, we'll try to correct it like we did about the far side of the moon on this program. Later on in the program, we corrected ourselves. We can't be perfect all the time, and we'd like to thank you.
But wait a minute. I would like to thank this caller and give him 3 points for disagreeing with us.
I agree.
So thank you for that call. Really do appreciate it.
No, we love people keeping us honest as well.
Amen.
Wow.
Because I sure as heck don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, the thing is, look, here's the thing. You could believe whatever you want about climate change, and somebody down the road's going to believe something different about it. It's just the way it is. Well, nobody, what was somebody famous in our government said something about alternative facts a while back?
Yeah.
It was a very, as politics, it's brilliant. As science, it's not so certain.
Yeah, the fact that and he disagreed with he said AOC never said 2 years ago that we were going to be die in 12 years The plan is because she's repeated that over and over again.
Well, first of all, the thing about numbers, when you're talking about the climate, there's all kinds of numbers to look at, and it depends on what set of numbers you're looking at.
Right.
Who you believe.
Yeah.
I mean, and look, I'm sorry. I was told a while back that when I was reading a newscast here by various news sources about the fact that we've got to please turn off your air conditioners. Don't charge your car until 3 o'clock in the morning. Exactly. Because we don't have enough electricity to get it done. So I'm just following the news reports that I'm told as a guy here on the radio that there's not enough power at certain times of the day and certain times of the year to charge all the air conditioners and run all the stuff we need to run.
Well,
just following what I'm told.
Okay, I'm very appreciative for his call and for chewing us out.
Well, I did look up Captain Bill's numbers, and he's actually correct. So of the overall atmosphere, 78% is nitrogen, almost 21% is oxygen, less than a percent is argon. The other 4% is the CO2 gases.
Yeah, carbon dioxide.
The four different,
exactly. Yeah, there's helium, neon.
Yeah,
methane, krypton, carbon dioxide. I mean, very
the one
small.
I liked was nitrous oxide. That's
nitrous oxide.
Yeah, that's part of the atmosphere. Anyway,
so that's why we're all happy all the time.
At least in California, maybe we have more nitrous oxide off our beaches.
So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a big difference now between our two countries, between China and the United States. Xi Jinping has turned his back on the modernization that instituted by Deng Xiaoping, and he's turning all the way back to Mao Zedong.
So does that mean they're going to turn off their bullet trains?
Well, who knows what's going to happen as they go further and further and further into this rectification campaign. Yeah. You'll note that all of the big businessmen in China have hightailed it. Mm-hmm. They're gone, and they're taking their money. You'll note that people working in the factories are starting to run for it because of the COVID. Yeah. So it's gonna get frightening over there. So how do we live with a modern times Mao Zedong? How do we negotiate with him?
Well, one thing's for sure. If I had a choice to play with Xi and his cards, or to be Biden, the United States president, and playing with our cards, I'd take our hand every day.
Every day, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see if Biden uses our strengths in negotiating with Xi Jinping, who always and only projects strength.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it was an interesting show today, and we'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Reminder that our China Watch Radio website has a lot of information. Please go there and check it out, and give us a call next week.
ChinaWatchRadio.com.
Yep. This is AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey. Flight 1080 is coming up.
Thank you, John T.
Hey, thanks, guys.